In this video, we're going to talk about how Sofia Vergara proves that you're learning Spanish in the wrong way. My name is Hamid, I'm 16 and fluent in 4 languages including Spanish. I became a polyglot at 13 years old after getting conversationally fluent in Spanish in 120 hours of studying, and now I help obsessed Spanish learners just like you reach conversational fluency using my simple methods. Here's my quick before and after.
Podré para mejorar mi español cuando no tengo mucho tiempo libre para estudiar español.
And here are some results from other people.
Quiero aprender español. Pues para mí me gusta jugar el ukulele para aprender español, así que ya lo sé la palabra el ukulele.
So I'm not going to waste your time here. These are the things we're covering. First, we're going to talk about the exact thing that Sofia Vergara proves, which is Spanish versus real Spanish. Then we're going to show the clip of her actually proving that. We're going to go through it a little. Then we'll talk about how to implement this for yourself and how I implemented it for myself and got fluent. And finally, we're going to end it off with a free gift for you when you make it to the end, okay? So let's start. When most people learn Spanish, they learn it the conventional way of memorizing the ABCs and doing flashcards and Duolingo. And this is mainly the reason why most people don't succeed. In fact, it's not surprising that there are so many people out there who have tried learning Spanish and who have thought of the idea, oh, I want to get fluent in Spanish, and then never actually executed on it. In fact, I have like 3 people that I know who have that exact experience, okay? And actually, I was one of them. So when I was first learning, I started with Duolingo, I started with memorizing the ABCs, and I started with all these BS methods, basically. But it wasn't until I first discovered this concept right here, Spanish versus real Spanish, where along with this and another language learning app that I discovered called Language Transfer, where I really started to actually see some progress, okay? And this honestly makes me feel bad because I see so many people wasting their time on methods that just waste our time because they don't teach this, okay? So this is what it's about. You probably noticed already, but real world Spanish does not sound the same as regular Spanish, in quotation marks. The Spanish that school teaches us, the Spanish that you hear on Dreamy Spanish, the Spanish that you hear on Duolingo. All of these are not actual, like, real Spanish, okay? And this is what Sofia Vergara proves, okay? So how do Spaniards actually speak? And we're going to prove this with a clip of Sofia Vergara speaking. If you don't know, by the way, Sofia Vergara is like this very popular actress, and she was in like Modern Family or something, right? So how do Spaniards actually speak Spanish? Do we say, hola, yo hablo español? No. Firstly, they would say, hola, hablo español. But this difference is actually much larger and more significant than if you just said it like that. And we're going to prove this, for example, here. So in all of my videos, I use this example just because it's very simple, but we'll show this example with Sofia Vergara, okay? So if we had words like, aquí estoy, escúchame, es que hay muchos problemas. A native would say, aquí estoy, escúchame, es que hay muchos problemas. And so do you see how much shorter and faster that becomes, okay? In fact, a lot of the times, not only will they drop, essays like I show here and like smush together words, but a lot of times they will literally skip entire consonants. So vowels are like E, A, I, O, U, right? And then everything else are consonants, okay? A lot of times, and when a native would pronounce, for example, the word privado, right? A native might say privado, like literally like that, right? The word for spoken is hablado. A native might say hablao, like literally. So, and we're gonna show how Sofia Vergara proves this and why most people have been learning Spanish the wrong way, which is the Spanish in quotation marks way. So here, Spanish, real Spanish, firstly has real vowels. So vowels are, everyone basically knows vowels, okay? Vowels is like step 0 when it comes to Spanish, okay? Most Spanish apps do pronounce it with Spanish vowels, okay? So if you didn't know, Spanish vowels are a, e, u, o. Speaking faster, dropping letters, and combining words. That is the main sauce. And that's what we're going to see that Sofia Vergara is going to prove, okay? And then we have the different letters and characters. Again, most Spanish apps do that. And then the Spanish tone and accent. In this case, she, I think, is Colombian, which means she's going to speak with that accent. And what this means for us is, I'll just ask you a simple question. When you learned English as your native language, or whatever your native language is, were you surrounded by real English or English, right? The reason why you don't say, I am wanting to learn English because I am very liking English with an Indian accent. The reason why you don't do that, and I'm not saying that to offend anyone, by the way, the reason why you don't is because that's not how your parents or environment spoke. That's not how real English sounded. Like, again, I'm not saying that English is not real English. I'm saying the English that you want to learn, if you wanted to go to America, if you wanted to go to the US, you probably shouldn't study that Indian accent, right? Because it's not the real English that you want to learn, at least, right? In this case, we want to learn real Spanish, which means we want to study the Spanish that we want to learn, which is native Spanish, not Hola, estoy hablando español. And so it makes no sense for us to study the non-native accent/speech because we don't want to learn it. And so when learning Spanish, we're going to learn real Spanish, meaning IRL Spanish, okay? Not Hola, me llamo Juan, me gusta hablar español, he estado aprendiendo español. But that's not how natives speak. And you probably already know this, right? So now let's prove this by watching a video of Sofia Vergara herself. Okay, so here we are on YouTube and I found this little podcast of her speaking. So this is the clip that we're going to watch and you're going to hear that from the beginning.
Es Toti.
Bueno, primero que todo, eso de que no tengo inseguridades, de que me creo que puedo con todo, de que, ¿cuál fue la otra cosa que dijiste?
Poderosas, valientes.
So even there, okay, you heard she says dijiste. Not dijiste, dijiste. You can hear it again.
De que, ¿cuál fue la otra cosa que dijiste?
Poderosas.
They're saying, what was the other thing that you said? And then she'll say,
Valientes.
¿De qué?
So her accents, you can hear actually, she has like a Spanish accent. In some accents, they do pronounce every single thing. But even then, a lot of times they'll speak so quickly that it doesn't matter.
No sé.
Bueno,
y poderosas de físico también.
Bueno, no todo eso es que lo tenga.
Es que. In the exact same way that I said, es que hay muchos problemas, you can hear her say, es que. Again. We'll go back a little.
Es que lo tenga.
Right?
Completamente. Pero sí siempre he sentido que puedo controlar todas esas cosas.
Right there again. Todas esas cosas. Do you get it? Do you hear that as well? Shortening the words, dropping the S's, speaking faster. And obviously, she actually doesn't speak that quickly, which is nice for us. But still, you can hear that accent there, that real Spanish.
He sentido que puedo controlar todas esas cosas y salir adelante. No me he bloqueado porque, ay, sí tengo inseguridad. Yo creo que todas, como cualquier
Toda. Again, right?
mujer, cualquier ser humano. Pero no dejo que me paralicen las inseguridades ni los malos.
Again, dale, dropping the S's at the end. I'm going to stop using that examples. However, we're going to hear it a lot more.
Pensamientos, tengo todo igual lo que tenemos todas, pero no dejo que me bloqueen.
¿Y cómo haces eso?
Bueno, yo
And
creo
in her accent, you can hear the Spanish accent there. So, haces, th on the C. And that's how native Spanish speakers from Spain usually pronounce the C's and the Z's.
es que teniendo ganas, he tenido siempre muchas ganas de hacer.
So here you can hear it you can hear it a lot here. So she goes,
Bueno, yo creo que teniendo ganas.
if you didn't have the subtitles and it was just, and it was just her speaking, you almost couldn't pick up on that que because it's so fast and smushed together and it's not que, it's que. And then here you can hear again, gana, even though it's ganas. And then she says ganas afterwards. Point being, real Spanish is not the same as the other Spanish. If you learned que and you heard someone say que like that, you're going to be confused. Which is why the way I teach Spanish in my program is to teach it in the same way that natives speak it, because we're trying to implement real Spanish. And that's how and that's what we're going to get into in the next step.
Ganas, he tenido siempre muchas ganas de hacer cosas. También la vida me ha dado muchas.
Right? And again there, me ha dado. Again, if a native says it fast, she says me ha dado. As though it's one word, smushed together, right? Me ha dado. Me ha dado. You can hear it again. You can hear it. It's very smushed. It's very, very fast. And not fast in the sense of speech. She doesn't speak that quickly. And obviously, in every conversation, you don't have to be super fast, right? But imagine this and being much faster. And that is like what real fast Spanish sounds like. The good thing about her is she's a good example, which is why I chose her for this video, because she speaks slower, but still has that accent.
cosas. También la vida me ha dado muchas, no sé, cosas duras que me han tocado sobrellevar.
Right? Cosa dura. And you might be wondering, how do you know that it's plural if she's not pronouncing the ending S? Because we know that to make it plural, we have to have an S at the end, right? So for example, cosa is one thing, so cosa, and then cosas is things, plural version of thing. But if she says cosa, how do you know that it's plural? And and it's in the H sound at the end. And that's actually how this automatic subtitles can actually understand that it's plural. Cosa dura, even though it could be cosa dura, right? And the reason why is because of that ending H sound. Okay, so they don't cut it out completely, but they have this H sound at the end. Okay, and this is how you can see she proves it. We'll go one more clip and then we'll talk about how to implement this and how do we study Spanish using this.
Llevar y que la única forma de sobrellevar ha sido trabajando y echando para adelante. Siempre he sentido que no he tenido opciones, opciones de sentarme a llorar o opciones de sentarme a lamentarme o a esperar que me caiga un marido.
And again, esperar, right? Esperar. So I use her as an example because she actually speaks kind of slowly enough that you can actually pick up on those sounds. But natives speak like exactly how she spoke, but even faster and with those same accent and smushed together words. And so the result is that real fast natives are extremely hard to understand. And that is the thing we want to tackle when learning Spanish. Okay, so now you're like, cool, okay, I got it. When I'm learning Spanish, I want to learn real Spanish, not slow, fake Spanish. I want to learn the Spanish that Sofia Vergara has, where she is speaking and she's dropping certain letters and she's smushing together words. I want to learn real Spanish. Cool. Now, how do we implement this into our Spanish learning? So the way I like to think about this is any studying that we're going to be doing, okay, any studying at all, okay, it should use real Spanish. And that is basically it, right? Here's the concept. The concept is, if you were trying to learn how to swim, okay, would you A, practice in air, so practice above water, or practice in water? You would practice in water, right? You wouldn't practice in air because when you're swimming, you're not in air, you're in water. So, right, would you have all your clothes on, or would you be naked or like in swim clothes, right? Basically, do you understand the concept? The way we practice for something is by optimizing for that thing. Meaning, if you want stronger abs, you train abs. You do crunches. You don't do squats. You want to get better at a given movement, you should do that movement more. Just more of that movement, right? If you want to get better at pull-ups, you could train your traps, which are used in pull-ups, but it would not beat just doing pull-ups directly. Meaning, when we talk about real Spanish, we're talking about audible Spanish. And so, when we want to understand real Spanish and learn real Spanish, it means that when we're learning vocabulary, that vocabulary should be in the context of natives. Okay? So my equation for getting fluent in Spanish is called the Fluency equation, and the way to do it is called the learn ser ladders, okay? And I cover those in other videos many, many times, but it's not relevant to this video. The exercise that I use to learn Spanish vocabulary, which is also what I teach my clients to use, is called transcript training. And in transcript training, it goes like this, okay? Basically, to get better at understanding spoken Spanish, so learning real Spanish, we want to listen to spoken Spanish, understand spoken Spanish, and repeat, okay? You want to get better at swimming? You need to swim more, okay? So we want to get better at understanding Spanish. How do you understand Spanish? Well, you need to listen to it first, and then you need to try to understand what is being said. And that's it. Very simple. And then obviously repeat those 2 steps. And so there are a million ways to climb the learn ladder. There are millions of ways to do this. But the way I do it in order to implement real Spanish is when I'm listening to spoken Spanish, I am listening to real Spanish. So for me, I like to use native content. So I watch native content and then I go through these 3 steps. So I listen to the native content, then I understand the spoken Spanish, and then I repeat, okay? That is how I like to do it. Other ways that I've seen people say to do, which it still follows the concept of Spanish versus real Spanish, I still wouldn't recommend it for the sake of understanding the why behind the language and implementing the fluency equation at its best. But if you're just watching this in order to learn Spanish for real Spanish, I could still recommend this. So I think I've seen it on an app called Memorize, where people speak the words, and it's like a flashcard deck, basically. But then on the flashcard deck, it's actual natives that are pronouncing those words. And so then they might, I'm not sure if the app Memorize does this, but the concept here is when you learn a word, you learn the native way of pronouncing it, okay? I think all of that is very iffy. I hate flashcards. I don't think flashcards is a good way of learning. And I've tried it and I've made 10 times more progress using this method, transcript training, okay? The way I like to do it is I like to listen to native content that is obviously following real Spanish. So for example, that podcast we just saw, that could be a piece of content that I would study maybe, right? And I would choose content that has accurate subtitles and transcripts so that I can understand the content, which is the next step. I would use DeepL and SpanishDictionary.com in order to understand what's going on. So translating every single word, understanding all the context. And obviously you need to know some grammar before you do that. I have other videos covering how to learn grammar and going through, the entire list of frameworks that you saw there. But basically, just understanding what's going on by using DeepL, grammar sources, and SpanishDictionary.com. And finally, once I've understood a sentence, I go back to before the sentence and then see if I can understand it now, which I should. And the goal is to understand everything. And in this way, this is what I did in the summer of 2022 when I first got fluent in 120 hours of studying. I learned words, but I didn't just learn words. I learned the native way of pronouncing those words. And so in this way, I was able to learn that sometimes natives will say que. Or for example, in the show that I watched, the content that I watched, the girl said acá estoy. And what she meant was acá estoy, here I am. But she said acá estoy. And it was super like, what is this? Right? In the moment. But now I understand if someone said that, if someone said toy instead of estoy, I know they're saying estoy. And that's the advantageous part of this, okay? And this is also why lots of people who first learn with the traditional method, they hear natives and they're just like, what is that? According to an AI analysis of my transformation, I was able to save 200 to 250 hours compared to the average learner, which just proves to me that this is the way. And for example, one of my clients I had who was 15 saved, according to an AI analysis, 200 to 350 hours compared to the average learner. And that's the transformation that you saw in the beginning as well. And so I truly believe that implementing real Spanish into your Spanish studying will give you huge leverage on your Spanish learning. And what I mean by this is the output that you get is larger than the input, meaning you'll make exponential progress, okay? Exponential means it goes up like that, right? So leverage it basically, you get way more output on the input that you put in. So if you put in 1 unit of effort, you get 3 units out of it, okay? So for example, this presentation that I made, if I presented it in a classroom, then maybe 30 people can see it. Whereas if I post this on YouTube like I have, then 100 people can see it, right? Or 1 million people or 10 million people. And so there's more leverage than if I just presented it in front of a classroom of 30 people. And the reason why this it leads to exponential growth is that it compounds, okay? The more words that you learn with real Spanish, the more and more real Spanish words you will be accustomed to. And so compared to the person that learns every individual word, by the time you guys have ended your Spanish learning journey, he is maybe here and you're up here. And so the idea here is when you learn real Spanish, you're going to be so much better than the person who doesn't, because your Spanish has been accustomed and calibrated to real Spanish, not to slow Spanish, okay? It doesn't work linearly where you slowly go up and then eventually you'll understand those words, because that isn't how you work. Just imagine this, okay? If you learned a word like estoy and you didn't learn the toy version of it, okay? Do you think that you should just study more of estoy and eventually you're going to understand toy when it's said in context? That's not how it works. You get better at something by doing more of it. If you want to get better at swimming, you should do more swimming, right? And so I've personally seen in my progress and in other people's progress, the people that make the most progress when it comes to conversational fluency and making progress, it comes with studying the hard stuff first. Because it's going to be hard in the beginning. You're going to suck. You're going to suck so much. But then you're going to get slightly better. And then you're going to suck. And then you're going to get slightly better. And then it's going to repeat like that until finally you understand every single word in real Spanish. And in which case your Spanish is 1,000,000 times better than the person who learned estoy only in the beginning. And this doesn't mean that we don't learn Spanish that is like estoy, right? Obviously, if you're a complete beginner, when you're learning grammar, when you're learning that stuff, of course, don't start here, okay? A lot of people misinterpret what I say and think I'm saying that you should directly jump into native content. That is not how it works. That's not how I teach Spanish in my program either. But what I am saying is when we want to specifically learn vocabulary, that the vocabulary that we study is this, not this, because this isn't real Spanish. And so that is how Sofia Vergara proves this concept of Spanish versus real Spanish and how we actually should study Spanish. This is all just a small piece from my program, and so if you finally want to start learning Spanish and actually implementing these frameworks, then you can check the description to join my program. But act now because I don't know when the price may increase, so if you want the cheaper price now, then check the description now. Otherwise, as a thank you for reaching the end, you can check the description or the pinned comment to grab my free, easy-to-use Cognate cheat sheet to unlock thousands of Spanish words instantly. And it's literally yours instantly, no email needed. It's totally free. It's just my gift to you for watching the video to the end, which I really, really appreciate. Otherwise, I would really appreciate it if you shared this video with someone who you think would benefit, and I hope you enjoyed. Stay humble.